Dark Side of the Ring, Nick Gage, as we had mentioned a bit
Hmm.
earlier. Did you get a chance to watch the episode, Kate?
I did. I watched it today. I was interested because I only just a couple days ago got around to watching the Brian Pillman episode, so the comparison was very fresh in my mind, and I wasn't as familiar with Gage. I think what I realized as I was watching was I'd heard a fair bit about him. I just never. It was like I didn't remember the name properly, or I never connected him to these various stories. I'd heard the story about a guy like almost dying from having his brachial artery sliced open at a show at one point, and I had definitely I'd heard a lot about the David Arquette match, and so it was it, it was interesting to see like, oh wow, this is all of this is the same guy. Again, this is someone who you could tell like this is someone who had a very a hard life, a hard time starting early on. And one of the things that I found interesting is that compared to what you saw of other people they've covered, and I'm thinking in particular of Pillman, obviously, because I'd just seen it, and even of Chris Benoit, um, the look is really, it's very warts and all with Gage, that he really is presented, and even though he has the opportunity to say these things in his own words, he does not come he does not come off as tremendously sympathetic at times, not the way some other guys have. The funny thing was like when at the same time when the episode came out, I guess last night,
Mhm.
I saw this like huge wave of comments on Twitter of just wrestlers like talking about like their own stories with him and praising him and talking about what an influence he'd been, how helpful he'd been. So it's almost like by letting him kind of talk about his own story and be the principal character, it's almost as if it painted him in a less sympathetic light than if they had spoken to a lot of other people. Was it that because certainly what other people have said about him, and I know I found out later he's he took a very vocal stance in favor of trans rights, and with it also within the industry, which is sort of that's again something that makes him into a much more sympathetic character, but it's not the sort of thing you see there. But it definitely it was a hell of a watch, and I'd forgotten how I guess when we're away from the sort of death match arena for a while, you forget like how intensely violent you can get. I mean, this is I'm a horror film fan, and the gore in that was still sort of it was getting to me at times. I guess because it's not effects. Um, yeah, I also found that the ending of this show, unlike with the Pillman episode, where the ending is very much about Brian Pillman Jr. and him taking on the mantle of his father, and sort of in a way, kind of making something good and hopeful out of what happened, out of something very terrible that had happened to him. In this one, the ending is very dark, and uh, the last line is just the guy basically saying, he expects to die, and he expects to die younger, like he expects to die sooner rather than later, which is it's chilling.
I thought when they announced Nick Gage as a topic for Dark Side of the Ring, I found it somewhat unusual because he's very much an active wrestler, rather than
Mhm.
somebody who has either passed on or like is maybe a controversial figure from the past. He's no doubt, I suppose. I don't even know if controversial is what you would call him, but certainly somebody with
Mhm.
a great deal of interest who kind of exists on the fringe of mainstream wrestling. But immediately it stood out to me because I've seen this guy like slice David Arquette up or like be featured in, any sort of like GCW show. And I've seen firsthand the incredible amount of attachment his audience has for him. And I marvel at that every single time. But of
Mm-hmm.
course, I don't really know all that much about his backstory, about him specifically, like what makes the guy tick. And this episode definitely like opened it up completely to, tell you what he went through. And I thought it was great. It was incredibly captivating the whole way through. And I thought it presented him as like, like to me, Nick Gage is the type of character, human being that is made
Mm-hmm.
for a documentary, that is made for a biopic, because he feels very much like he's like much like New Jack, somebody who you aren't really sure if he is a character or if that's actually who he is. And
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes, I mean, that's what makes the best pro wrestling characters, right? But from the moment that you see him in his youngest version on that softball team, like that, he looks like Nick Gage as you would expect at whatever age he is on a softball
Mm-hmm.
team.
Yep.
Um, but then,
100%. It's like you were just going to turn out to be this person.
yeah,
This
you are
all,
Nick
yeah.
Gage in a 12-year-old
Mm-hmm.
body.
Yeah.
But like the amount of like I would say difficulties and hardships that the man has gone through in his own life, either of his own doing or not of his own doing, I thought were really interestingly highlighted throughout. His kind of like man insatiable appetite for like this type of like hardcore violent wrestling, I thought was
Mm-hmm.
displayed really
Mm-hmm.
well. And they've done have they done like hardcore? They've done like hardcore types of like I guess
I
documentaries.
know. Yeah. It's funny because actually just a couple weeks ago I was watching the documentary The Backyard.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know if you've seen it, but it's almost like I actually went back and checked. Like, is there any possibility that Nick Gage was in that documentary? Because it's released in 2002, and so like it would have been about the time, but it it deals with a lot of these people who were sort of inspired by ECW and the Attitude Era WWE, who are just putting together shows in their backyard and trying to get signed up to the WWE or WWF as it was. And the characters that you meet there, like they're all Nick Gages. They're or worse.
Mhm.
They're like it is its own world, but yeah, like they all have that sort of ability to just absorb incredible amounts of pain, and they wear it as like a badge of honor.
It is the type of thing that I think if you understand it, if you're into it, you're really into it. And if you are outside of that circle, you cannot fathom and you cannot understand why this is even legal and why anybody would
Yeah.
possibly enjoy it. And I find that incredibly interesting as an extension of this art form of pro wrestling that like we're about to talk about. We're about to
Hmm.
talk about a show that is the farthest thing away from the king of the death match as you
Oh
could
yeah.
possibly think about,
Yeah.
yet they still exist
Absolutely.
within the same genre. I mean, it's very much you know, like reggae and like death metal might use the same instruments, but like they
Yeah.
are worlds apart. And I find that incredibly
Hmm.
fascinating when talking about like how the branches of like what an art form can get into. But this
Hmm.
documentary, I thought like presented his story really well, getting into like how he died for about 7 minutes. In one of
Hmm.
the Moxley had some great lines on this, talking
Oh
about
yeah.
how
Yeah. He definitely, like, it just shines through as sort of, he's the sort of, well, I guess the two people that leave you with good feelings coming out of that would be John Moxley and Brett Lauderdale from GCW in very different ways. Like Lauderdale,
yeah.
because he's the one who stuck with the guy and took over the sort of brother role when
Hmm.
Nick's relationship with his brother kind of fell apart.
But Moxley saying he died at the tournament of death, like when that's really just supposed to be a catchphrase. Mox also had another line that I think caught a lot of headlines today on Twitter, saying Vince would kill that one person who connects with fans like Nick
Hmm.
Gage, and I don't
Hmm.
know if that would necessarily be true, or to what extent that would be true. Would Vince be willing to have somebody who is this perhaps risky in ring in exchange for that? I
I
don't
think
know,
I think
but
Vince would kill to have someone who had that connection with fans. I don't think he'd kill to have someone who got the connection from doing the sorts of things and being the sort of character that Nick
mhm.
Gage is. So I think, yeah, like of course you want someone to
Mhm.
inspire that kind of excitement and loyalty. But I don't. Yeah,
Well,
I
another
do
question.
wish that.
Please go ahead.
I was going to say the one thing that I wished had been in the documentary was that I wish they'd actually talked to some of his fans, because that seems to be a really key component
Mhm.
of his story, is this connection with the fans. And so without actually talking to these people, because I was fascinated, it's like, what is it about this guy? Like, you're sending him letters in prison. He wasn't ever high profile before that. And they said, he got bigger when he was in prison.
I imagine
Um,
that might have been a limitation of like the pandemic, not
yeah.
being able to
Yeah, no, no,
film
yeah,
him
yeah,
at a
yeah.
show. But yeah, that would have added a lot. I certainly think that like, to me, an interesting question would be these fans love Nick Cage because I think he feels so real. Like as a baby face,
Mm-hmm,
I don't know if you can pick many people that feel more like they're this guy. Like he is an outrageous character in the wrestling ring, and seems to embody that outrageous character inside outside the ring as well. And I think
mm-hmm.
for so many of those reasons, like these audiences just like love to gravitate towards him. But is that violent style at this point necessary for him to maintain that relationship with the audience? I wonder. I don't know.
Yeah, like I think, and certainly given the what he's put his body through, you'd like to think he could have the last part of his career doing things that are still appreciated, but that don't further exert this huge toll, because they, again, like the number of injuries, the drug use, the time in prison is hard. It's hard on the body. And yeah, and then to say nothing of picking God, God knows how many shards of glass have made their way into his bloodstream at this point.
Fuck yeah. What did you think of the I guess both David Arquette and Nick Gage's recounting of their match?
um I thought it gave I got the impression that it was a very fair and honest presentation. You were definitely left with the impression that these two weren't happy either with the way the match turned out or with each other. When I initially heard the story, I have to say, okay, and this is back like before. Again, I put together who Nick Gage was like a couple of years ago. Um, my first thought was like, okay, Arquette's a fool for getting involved in this, but what were they thinking was going to happen? Like, this is crazy. Watching the episode of Dark Side of the Ring, I felt more sympathy for Nick Gage, because it seemed like, and Arquette said this, that he was warned. Gage tried to explain to him, this is what you can expect. It's going to, and yeah, I guess the one sort of thing that he did terribly wrong was break the promise not to
Cut
cut,
him.
not to cut him.
Meanwhile, he
Yeah.
brings out the pizza cutter and like does the whole thing with like, putting it
Mhm.
across his head and his mouth.
The exact same thing that
He did to
Moxley had
Mox.
just described having
Yeah.
done to him earlier in the show.
It is
But
I should mention, like, I mean, because of the nature of pro wrestling, like when I hear conversations like this, I do have to wonder, okay, are they working us? Like, how much of it is a work? How much
mm,
of it is exaggerated? How much they actually talk about this? I'm of the mind that I think they were telling the truth here, and that Arquette
yeah,
was telling the truth. But I don't really know how to feel. I don't know if I necessarily feel as much sympathy for Nick Gage, because it's like, on the one hand, yes, like he is known for kind of being this unpredictable, very realistic, hardcore match wrestler, and perhaps David
yeah,
Arquette somebody should have warned him, and he should have done his research
mm,
before like heading into something like
yeah,
this. But there's definitely, I imagine like Arquette's mindset was like, okay, deathmatch wrestler, okay, kind of like Cactus Jack versus Edge,
hmm,
maybe I'll go through some
hmm,
light tube, some like barbed wire. It's gonna look crazy, but I will be protected. And I feel like professional wrestling should have that level of trust when you enter any sort of pro wrestling match with your opponent. I never want to see people actually get hurt, nor fear for like their actual safety when they're in the ring with somebody else. Deathmatch
yeah, and
wrestling is a
definitely.
totally different world, of course, but I
Hmm.
still feel like that is one must have of any sort of form of professional wrestling. It should be cooperative, and you should, care for the safety of your opponent. We talked so much about this past week about whether or not like wrestling shows should continue the facade of like carrying on kayfabe as somebody gets injured, whether it be in Humberto Carrillo's case or Orange Cassidy's case. This was a case where a man felt like he was about to die after he was cutting his neck with a light tube. And Gage was like, I've seen this a million times.
It's like, oh, it's just a nick. Yeah, it's like a little, it's your throat getting cut, dude. It's not good.
But
like, and he hasn't had it done to him a million times. He's not a deathmatch wrestler. And
it's true, yeah. But like, what rule book does it say? Okay, if you get cut in the neck and you're bleeding a lot, if you're not squirting blood, keep on with the match. It's okay. I felt really bad for David Arquette, like in that situation,
I did and I didn't, because I thought that I fell on the side of, dude, it's called a death match. What it was on you to do your research. You should have looked in. Yes, you should be able to. You should be absolutely be able to trust your partner. But the thing is, if you look into that at all, what you find out is it's actually in a lot of cases, the kind of match where you can have the least trust with your partner, because things get out of control very quickly. And that's what and certainly I think any amount of searching into what Gage did or what death matches are, particularly the tournament of death thing, it's the internet exists. This did not happen in the 70s. It's possible to find out the information. And I think though and particularly since Gage says that he warned him. Arquette, I don't think specifically said that, but he also didn't refute it. It just wasn't covered. Like he kind of owned up to the fact that he had been warned, but and it was all done with this. I quite like the way they do the sort of shadowy reenactments on Dark Side of the Ring, but it was just priceless. The one that they had of Arquette and Gage having lunch in this sort of high-end LA bistro, and you could just see it. The figure portraying Gage is like waving the fork around. I was like, okay, I shouldn't be laughing at this, but this is tremendously entertaining. Like, I'm very glad they did it that way. So yeah, I think, but again, our reactions show that you can kind of fall on either side of that. I think that, I think that there was also a problem with like egos being involved too, where, Gage did, and he admits it, want to show this guy up because he wasn't a wrestler like he's a wrestler. And Arquette says straight up he wanted to show that he wasn't just a movie star who had done this stunt on WCW. Even the narration says when it was in its decline. So
certainly a controversial figure who we didn't even get into the bank robbery really, but like plenty of activity.
Talked about that and and he robbed a bank. Yeah, that's
like really the man has lived like a movie in his lifestyle already. Feels like honestly like a modern day cowboy in the form of a hardcore deathmatch wrestler. So very interested to hear everybody's thoughts. We look forward to you guys if you want to talk about that a little bit later on as we take phone calls. But let's get into SmackDown, Kate.